that will keep you a bit safer when you're near your machine while it operates. And now we're on to the table mounting. So I'm sure you guys have heard me talk a lot about the surface already, and I'm sure if you were researching your LongMill, you've already done some considerations for the surface you're mounting it to. So I'm not going to cover this in much depth, but there are a couple explanations of how you might want to set this up. What's your table versus what's your wasteboard? What have other people created on their machine? What are some other ideas that we can offer to you? Stuff like that. And it also discusses making sure that you have enough space on your table for all your components. In this case, the MDF piece I'm using won't have the space for all these other components. For me, that's fine because I'm just going to have them sitting off to the side on the table. And obviously, I'm not going to be keeping it on this table long term because I'm just showing it to you for assembly. And so that's fine for my situation. But for you guys, I would take some of these into better consideration, the long-term location of your components. And that's actually spoken about more if you click down to, in the page contents, to mounting the rest. The rest refers to the control box, the e-stop, the power supply, mounting those all in a good spot. So we're just going to move on to getting it mounted. And for me, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on getting this really accurately positioned because I'm just kind of doing it for demonstration purposes for you guys. But essentially what you want to be doing is we like to have a Robertson driver bit on hand because the screws we provide are Robertson. If you don't have this driver, you can use your own screws. And the reason we provide this length is it's because it's a reasonable length for holding your machine down, but you can use longer ones if you prefer as well. And essentially what we're just going to be doing is we're going to be focusing on the right side of the machine first and putting screws in along the way, and then moving over to the left side, putting some screws in along the way. And what this process is doing is it's not just mounting your machine down to the surface, but it's also getting the two sides of the machine square to each other so that all the cuts that you make are accurate. So my process is I'm going to be kind of doing a sped up version of what's already written here because I'm already very familiar with it. But I'm just going to open up GSender and start by moving the machine close to the front after I unclick the e-stop so that I have power. I'll also remind you guys that after you've done all of your tuning steps, I forgot to mention this for the previous page, you should be able to check that each of your lead screws is possible for you to rotate them with your fingers without too much difficulty. If you find it difficult to rotate them, it could be possible that you tighten your anti-backlash nuts too far, you tighten your wheels too far, or some other step previous in the process has gone wrong. And so just check those out and just as I did, do a little bit of a wiggle, do a little bit of a spin on each axis, and just confirm that everything's looking good. Okay. So just as the instructions say, I'm going to be starting off on the right side here, and I'm just going to be using the factory edge, and I'm not going to make any particular measurements. I'm just going to put it roughly where I want it and place it down. And we're going to do the two outside screws for the feet first. And this is going to get you roughly positioned. And you're going to want to make sure you also drive these screws in far enough that your feet end up flat to the table. And If at this point you have just realized you made a mistake and put it in the wrong spot, don't worry, the design's got you covered. The feet actually have 2 pairs of holes in them, the end feet, I should say. And so go and make your checks right now that your right side your right side y-axis is in the right spot that you want it to be, and then keep following along with me. Otherwise, you can shift it around ever so slightly and use the other set of holes to get it in the right position if you want it just slightly adjusted from where it's at now. I'm also going to be putting in now the back screws for the middle feet, and then after this is done, I'm going to be putting in the remaining screws for the right side. And just remember for the plastic feet that you do not you don't reef down as hard on these as you do on the metal feet. The metal feet can take whatever you throw at them, but the plastic feet, if you are really giving it, you could potentially break them, because obviously the screw is going to hold into the MDF much stronger than the integrity of the plastic will. And I'm just going to put down the other set of screws on the other outside feet. Make sure you don't strip out your MDF surface or whatever you're screwing to. The machine's a little bit in my way, so I'm just going to jog it. There we go. And that should be rigidly mounted. I'll also mention that if you can get a longer driver bit, it'll help the assembly process go much faster. I realize I put the screws in a bit of a different order than the instructions show, but the order isn't super necessary for the right side. You're mostly just starting with the end feet and then doing the middle feet, and whatever order you follow on that is good enough, because it just makes sure that it's mounted straight. So here's basically where you want to be mindful of the other side. You can see how much I can move this by. Even though we have gone and tightened everything down, it shifts around by quite a bit. And so you can see in the diagram there that you can, if you're not careful, the left side can end up skewed from the right side or misaligned from the right side. And that can have an effect on your machine and on your cutting. And so you've got a couple options to make sure they're aligned. The easiest ones is basically using a straight edge or some other reference surface to add a space or two or whatnot in order to make sure that the one side and the other side are lined up correctly. The other way you can do it is, I don't think I have a measuring tape near me, but you can run a measuring tape from the underside of the rail to the opposite foot using those edges on the feet. So you do it on the one side and you do it on the other side, and those measurements should both be equal to each other. If one of them is larger than the other, so let's say the measurement from this diagonal is larger, then that means I need to move this foot inwards further so that it reduces that measurement and increases this measurement. For those diagonal measurements, you might need a partner to help you out. So just get their help if you need it. I am going to do this kind of more sketchy method that I don't recommend to you, where I basically am just seeing where the machine feels like it wants to sit, and I'm just going to put it there. But we're also not going to be using this machine to make anything precise, so keep that in mind. It's up to you and what resources you have at your disposal or what tools you have available to you, how you want to align these two sides. But basically, we're just trying to, as I said, make sure they're both aligned to each other, and we'll just follow through for the rest of the assembly process now. And once again, the order of these isn't super important. You're just doing the end feet first, and then you're following up with the middle feet. Now, what I tend to do is I tend to put just one screw down on the front foot, and then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to jog the machine all the way back to the rear foot before I put the screw into the rear foot. And by doing it this way, I'm ensuring that the machine is kind of forcing the feet to be at the right spacing because the axis is actually at that location. So I'm just going to go screw that in. Oops. And now that that screw is in place, we can jog the machine to, oops. So basically what happened there was the machine was just a little bit skewed, so I'm just running it into the one side in order to make sure it's aligned. And now I'm going to put in these middle screws. Now that the machine is in the middle. Oops. And now that you've got one screw in each of the feet, you can go back to each of them and put in the second screw. And I'll just say the skewing that you saw there, basically what is happening is that because we initially placed the y-axes on by hand, it means that the two sides are going to be misaligned from each other. And so what happens is you don't notice anything when the machine is on the table, just loosely, like it's not fastened in place. And the reason why is because nothing is putting it under stress. But you probably would have seen earlier on in the video that one of the y-axes was a bit further off than the other. They weren't perfectly aligned. And so what happens is when I start securing it down, the machine is now experiencing a lot of stress to twist. And that causes it to sometimes lose torque on the motors and twist even more. And so the solution for that is I tend to, in this case I brought it to the back feet, but I tend to bring it all the way to the front feet so that I can make sure that the two sides become realigned. And you basically just run it into the ends there, and then you can back it off. Oops. just like that. And then you can just back it off, and now the two sides will be aligned to each other. So this is something where if you are experiencing this happening to you after you've gone and mounted this to the table, then you definitely made a mistake in terms of getting the correct mounting geometry. So as I said, don't do what I do where I just kind of placed it down. You want to make sure that you're getting it roughly in the right spot, okay? So if you are experiencing this skewing, what it does mean is that they are misaligned. And so you're going to have to go back and adjust one of the sides and double check your measurements to make sure it's all there. And if you do double check your measurements or your diagonals and they are all adding up, then you'll want to go back to the screws and check that the screws are able to turn without too much resistance. Because when you hear that loud noise, that's basically the motors saying, I can't push any harder, something bad is happening. So we've now completed the table mounting, and for all intents and purposes, this is now a functioning CNC machine, believe it or not. The steps that finish off the page that you're on right now will cover things regarding how you can mount the rest of the components here. You'll notice that you've got mounting holes for the box, mounting slots for the power supply. The e-stop you can actually open up from the top, and there are two holes in the bottom that you can use to screw down the e-stop. So you can place it anywhere that's accessible to you, whether it's here or on the front or wherever else. And we also have some suggestions for motor cables. If you have a table that's got space underneath, instead of running the wires around loosely, you can either zip tie them up, or you can drill holes in your table to run the wires on the underside of the table. The only wire you really need to worry about is the back y-axis wire, and then the wires on the left side here. You probably want to tidy them up at least a little bit to make it all work well for your own setup. And now basically what we're going to do is, you should definitely take a picture with your machine. Like that. And also pat yourself on the back for the work that you've done, because it's pretty cool that you've gotten to this point. And otherwise, we're going to move on to making actually your first project on this machine. So feel free to read the remaining text here, and then we're just going to move on to the first project. So basically what this section exists for is we want to make sure that you guys just feel a little bit comfortable using your machine, and you don't feel like you have been thrown into the deep end. So the purpose of this page is we're not going to explain everything to you about how to use your machine. We have lots of other pages that you'll find. If you're in the resources on the left-hand side, we've got pages called the basics. That's the section where we talk about all of the basics that you might need to know about CNC if you don't already know. Software, if you haven't chosen a software yet for designing your projects. And we've also got a section called Handbook. Handbook is one where we've basically laid it out in a fashion that is like a manual. So if I've got, for instance, my Makita manual here, this is going to tell you a lot of stuff about your Makita trim router, things like maintenance and how to use it and what it's capable of, and all that other sort of stuff. And so you can think about this handbook section of our resources in the same way, where we cover things like using the machine, doing more advanced stuff with it, how to maintain it, how to troubleshoot it, where you can find projects, what inspiration you can find to make your own projects. If you're using your machine for business, if you want to watch more videos on other sorts of projects that people make or how they maintain their machine. It's all in the handbook section. And so once we're done doing this project, which will be your first project, you can move on to doing any assembly of add-ons, which is in the next section. And once you're done with your add-ons, that's when you'll wind up in the handbook section. And from there, you can just kind of move along on your own CNC journey and use anything that we make available to you. So, your first project. This is something that you can kind of choose your own adventure here. We've got the fun projects and the functional projects. And you can decide of the 3 projects available to you, which ones you want to cut out or which singular one you want to start by cutting out. And if you decide after you're done cutting it out, you can always loop back around to the top of the page and try running another one. In this case, I'm going to run the LongMill lettering project because for me, it's just the one that's the most basic and the easiest to run. And it's also one that we've been running for a long time since the first LongMill design, so I'm just a bit nostalgic about it, I suppose. So basically all you're going to be doing here is you're going to be looking on the page. There's going to be a picture available of the project. There's going to be a link to download the project. So if you click that, it'll download for you. You're going to have a description. And then what it's going to tell you is it's going to tell you the material needed to make the project and the type of cutting tool you'll need and the router speed you'll have to set for your router. There will also be a description later on showing how the project needs to be set up so that you can run it correctly. So I'm just going to take you guys through each of these steps so that you kind of can get an understanding of how you can go about making stuff on your CNC. Usually this process is a 3-step process. You do the design, and then you turn that design into G-code, and then you run that G-code on your machine. And what makes this a little bit easier is we've already done the design and we've already turned it into G-code. And so this first project, you're basically just taking that G-code, you're loading it into GSender or your other G-code software, and you're just running it on the machine. And it's as easy as that. So the first place we're going to be starting off with is we need to basically find a piece of material. Since I've selected the LongMill lettering project, I need to make sure I can find a piece of material that's roughly 302 by 35 by 2 millimeters. And those are kind of the minimum dimensions required. And for this project in particular, it says I can use any type of material. So I can use whatever I really want. So let's see what we got in the shop here. Here's a fun piece of scrap wood I found. Looks like someone had not a fun time over here. But I'm just going to cut it on this side here. I know that this size, I think, should be around the right size, so that should be fine. So step 1 is complete. I've found a material, it's the right size, and it's the right type of material as well. So the second step for setting up a project is securing it in place. The cutting area of the machine is the same as the area that it can move to. And so if you want, you can try jogging it around to get a feel for the extents of the travel that you can make with this machine. But for me, I'm just going to put it closer to the center so that I know it'll be able to reach all the different parts of this material. Some other good tips when you're mounting the material in place is that you'll want to make sure it's reasonably square. So if it's too tilted and I run the job will try to cut straight, but then the material will not be straight, so it won't really line up. So I'm going to try to make sure it's relatively straight. And the other thing to keep in mind is if you're using any sort of harder material, or sorry, harder hardware to fasten your material down, in this case I'm going to be using wood screws, then you've got to make sure you give yourself a bit of a buffer of space from the minimum size needed for the project so that you don't run into those screws later on. One last tip is I usually, when you want to use your material, usually you'll end up mounting it closer to the front. And the reason for this is just the convenience, basically. Having it closer to you means you can access it more easily for installing it in place or removing it. There's a lot of options you can choose from to mount your material down. You can use tape or glue or screws or nails or whatever you want. I'm going to use screws, and even though after this, I'm going to be, if I were you, I would work on setting up your space a little bit better. This is just our first project, so I'm just going to go ahead and screw this right down into the MDF, and I can always set up a better system later. These screws are a little long, so I'm probably attaching this MDF to the table too. Oops. I would also recommend pre-drilling if you use screws so that you don't crack your material. Like I'm doing here. So now that my material is relatively straight and nice and secure, I know it's not going to go anywhere. That's the second step complete. So on the third step, what we're going to do is we're going to find the right cutting tool to run this job. Now, if you ordered cutting tools with your machine, then these would be in the accessories, the variable box that I mentioned near the start, and you can go grab one of these and find one that's suited towards this work. If you didn't order one, but if you have just a random router tool sitting around, some of them will work just fine for use on the machine. Stuff like these are tools that you can buy as standard router bits, and they can work just fine on the machine. Just make sure you're not running any bits that are including these runner ball bearings for guiding the bit along, or that aren't able to plunge downwards like this one here that only has an edge on it but not a tip that can cut downwards. I think for this project, I'm going to use this cute little round bit because I've never run this with a cute little round bit before. Actually, this one's a little bit bigger. I'll use this one. And we'll see how it works out. As you can see, for this project, you can choose any cutting tool type you want. So this is what I'm going to choose. Now the step afterwards is we're going to put this in our router. So I tend to move the router up in the Z a ways so that that can give me the space I need to access the underside of it. Now in this underside, you're going to have the shaft of the motor, and then you're going to have a nut here. And if you go and you unscrew this nut, you're also actually going to find inside is what's called a collet. So this is your collet, this is your collet nut, and this is your shaft. Now, if the bit you plan on using is a 1/4 inch bit, then that's great because the Makita comes with a 1/4 inch collet by default. If it's an 1/8 inch bit, then you'll need to make sure that you either got the 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch adapter from us, which you basically put into this 1/4 inch adapter, or the 1/4 inch collet, in order to adapt the 1/4 inch collet to an 1/8 inch collet. Or if you bought the 1/8 inch collet from us, then you can take this 1/4 inch collet out entirely, grab your 1/8 inch collet, and install that into your Makita. So in this case, the collet is 1/4 inch and my bit is 1/4 inch. So I'm just going to put it right back in there and install my bit. And you can start off by just finger tightening the nut. Oops. As well as you can use this red button to stop the shaft from spinning. So I'm just going to insert this, hold the button, rotate the nut, just finger tighten it, and now the bit is kind of in place. But here's where I can use the provided wrenches to finish holding this bit in place. So what I'm going to do is there's flats that attach to the shaft, and that's with the small wrench, and then the nut uses the big wrench. And if I push these together with the small wrench on top and the big wrench on bottom, that's going to loosen the nut so that the bit can come out. I'm holding it with my fingers so it doesn't come out. And then if I push them apart, then that's going to tighten the nut onto the shaft, and now it's going to hold that bit really solidly in place. And now my bit is attached. So with your tool now in here and your material now down here, the last step to starting the project is you just gotta tell the tool where the material is. And this step is actually pretty easy. We're not going to be doing anything fancy here. We're basically just going to use the manual jog controls on the machine in order to get the machine roughly located to the right spot. So I'm just moving it over in the X. I'm moving it forward in the Y. And the reason why I'm bringing it to this front corner here is because you can see on the page that it specifies that the LongMill lettering project requires you to start in the front corner, the front left corner on the top of the material. So that's where I'm going to bring it to. Now, basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to roughly position it because, to be honest, I don't need this to be in an exactly perfect spot. I've got a lot of space around here to run my cut. And basically, the only thing I am being mindful of is that I'm going to set my starting point offset from the screw so that I don't risk running into it. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to manually use the coupler with my fingers. I'm going to spin it and bring the bit down to the surface. And I'm just going to grab a piece of paper here. I'm just using the Makita manual. And all that I'm going to do is I'm just going to spin this until I can move the paper. But if I were to spin it anymore, I wouldn't be able to move the paper. And now this is my top left corner starting point. And so because I've set up the cutting tool and the material in the right positions, what I'm going to do in the software is I'm going to hit this button, 0 all. And what the 0 all is going to do is it's going to say to the machine, okay, you've now set your starting point for running this job. Because I've set my starting point, I can now just go and find the file that I've downloaded. So if you've already gone and you've clicked the link on the page for the project, then usually you'll be able to find your files either in your documents or your downloads. I load up the file here and you can see that I can left click and move around and I can zoom in and stuff like that. But what's most important is that I can see that my bit is at that corner where the L is going to be, and the rest of the project is going to run to the right of that. Now, GCenter has a lot of interesting features in it that can allow you to run an outline of the job beforehand if you want, or test run the code if you think it's going to fail. But we've pre-made these projects for you, and so a lot of this stuff you won't normally need to do. You can see those dimensions that were provided on the page are similar to the dimensions here with a little bit of buffer. And the very last thing we're going to do is we're just going to double check that we set the router speed correctly, which it says on the page to set it to about 3.5. And so we're going to put the dial on the router between 3 and 4. And you're just imagining that there's a notch in the very middle there in order to know what setting you're at. And with all of this stuff set up, we should be good to go. All you really need to do at this point is you just power on the router and you click Start Job, and it'll start to send the file over to the machine and start cutting it out. So let's see what that looks like. And there we go. Just like that. That only took about 1 minute to run, and you definitely would have noticed it was running quite slowly. And really the only reason why this job runs slowly is because we tell you can use any bit you want and any material you want. And so we just want to make sure that if you're using a massive bit, we're not moving too quickly through the material. So I'm just going to move this out of the way now. In the Z, I'm going to jog it, and then in the Y, I'm going to move it backwards. And let's just take this out and admire our work. Here's our material cam here. All the other stuff was, there before because I just grabbed the scrap material. But look at these clean lines, just like that. And we barely fit it all inside. Not too bad. If I were to do it again, I probably would grab something that's a little less scrappy because then I could feel, nicer about hanging this up and just admiring it. So, but there you have it. That's the completed the machine. We've been able to cut something out on it. I hope you were able to take some stuff away from not just the way we designed the machine, but also how you can familiarize yourself with it, how you can set it up, how you can go and use it to cut stuff out. And I know we took some shortcuts here by pre-making the code for you and giving you some guidance on how to set it up. But you'll find in the long run that once you become familiar with these steps and with the process as a whole, it's not actually too hard to wrap your mind around. You're basically just going and you're making like a digital design on your computer, and then you're just making sure that in the real world, you're making a real world version of that, putting your material there, putting your tools there, and then you're able to run it, and you're effectively taking this design made in a digital space, and it's now becoming a physical thing. It's really fun. So we'll be finishing off this video here. You've got an assembled machine. As I said previously, we've got the next section on add-ons. And for the add-ons, we have individual videos and writing that you can follow to make sure that you're covered. And let me face this way. And after that, we've got the handbook. And I would really recommend that if there's anything that you're worried about or still confused about running your machine, or some aspect of using it, that you check those sections out, check the other areas of the resources that we have. We also, in the resources, recommend other YouTube channels and educational resources outside of just our own, so that, let's say you don't like the way we describe things, you can see how other people describe them. And so I'd encourage you just to look around, be curious, enjoy this new tool that you have, and make cool stuff with it. So yeah, we'll conclude it there. Thank you guys for following along with me, and I hope you have a great day.